Hello class and welcome to chapter 3. In today's lecture we're going to be talking about ethical frameworks and their role and the role they play in decision making. We're going to cover about 6 different ethical frameworks through this lecture, so bear with us, pay attention, this is really good stuff. The first framework we're going to talk about is Kohlberg's levels of moral development. Kohlberg actually argues for 3 different levels of moral development. Now, it's important that when we talk about morality that you understand that we're referring to the personal decisions that a person makes. So we're talking about the individual level and not group or societal level or anything like that. We're talking about an individual and what he or she determines to be right or wrong, good or bad. So the idea that what's right or wrong for you as an individual does exist, but you still got to operate within the greater confines of society or the group or whatever else that you're interacting with. So when we kind of look at all that and mix it all up, how do we determine whether or not our actions are moral, whether they're good or bad, or they're right or wrong? Kohlberg gives us a framework for that. We're going to go over 6 different frameworks throughout this lecture. So Kohlberg says that there's 3 different levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and principled level. In pre-conventional, people tend to make decisions that are primarily focused on themselves. They're not really worried about the impact their actions or behaviors have on other people, on society, on the environment. They're not worried about any of those things. They're just primarily worried about for themselves. And they make decisions that are completely in line with their self-interest. This is the lowest level of moral development. When he argues that the second level is the conventional level, which says that people now, while they're concerned for themselves, they're also concerned for society and the various norms and regulations that may govern the group that they're a part of. And a group could be anything. It could be a group of friends. It could be your family group, which is the most fundamental group in all of society, right? It could be a department at work. It could be a work group. It could be any number of things. So when I say groups, I'm talking about any form or structure where there are 2 or more people interacting on a regular basis, and they have to set up some sorts of interaction protocol for each other in terms of behavior. So the conventional level argues that people, while looking out for their own self-interest, they also look out for the interests of other people. They look out for the interests of the group and or society and or the laws that govern society. However, there is a step above and beyond that. And what Kohlberg argues is that there's what's called a principle level. And the principle level, people are guided by an internal set of beliefs or standards that help them to clearly define right from wrong. So many people rely on religion or their family teachings or various other principles they may have developed along the way throughout their lives. But these serve as guideposts. They serve as beacons of behavior and how you should carry yourself, behave, or interact when faced with various situations. This is what he argues is the highest level of moral development. And it's also important to note, when we're talking about morality, we're talking about things that work for the generally good, things that support and are edifying for life, well-being, health, happiness. So someone may have principles, but those principles are deviant. They're designed to harm people or society. We're not using that as a standard of morality. That doesn't even come into the question of what is moral behavior. It's simply not moral behavior and is deviant. So when we talk about principle level here, according to Kohlberg, we're talking about rules and beliefs for oneself that transcend or go beyond mere society or the rules and regulations associated with whatever group that you're a part of. Another framework we want to talk about here that people very frequently use to determine right from wrong is utilitarianism. You've probably heard this before, so this may be a bit of a review to you, but I want to say that utilitarianism is a very popular and probably of all the different frameworks we're going to go through, probably the most frequently used. And it's based on the premises we strive to make decisions that create the greatest amount of happiness or pleasure in the world. Or, stated differently, you can say that create the least amount of pain or suffering in the world. And the decision that aligns itself with the reduction of the greatest amount of pain or the creation of the greatest amount of happiness is inherently the moral or correct decision. In other words, we evaluate the morality of a decision based off the consequences. So I look at what was the consequences of that action or behavior, and if that behavior created the greatest possible good or the greatest possible outcome for the most people, then we'll say that action was moral. If it failed to do so, then we would say that could have been an immoral behavior. So This is what utilitarianism framework is all about. In business school, we are constantly socialized through economic principles, supply and demand, through marketing principles, financial principles, the fact of how we form corporations and that we're supposed to look out for the shareholders' interests. We are constantly bombarded with the idea that utilitarianism is a valid and a correct framework for us to make decisions. I just don't know what to do. Well, what's going to create the greatest amount of benefit for the organization? And, well, that is the correct decision to make for the company. Now, let's discuss some of the risks or challenges with this framework, some of the dangers in it, right? The idea that majority rules, looking out for the interest, the happiness of the majority of people, inherently it sounds acceptable. So that makes sense, and I understand it conceptually. After all, we are bombarded with this framework in society. However, when you take a closer look, you see there's some problems. One, the majority does not always bear in mind the effects of their actions on the minority or the people who are inherently disenfranchised from society. So simply because majority of people like it, it makes them happy, does not mean that the action was right. It may make most of the people happy to steal. Therefore, stealing is okay. Stealing is morally appropriate. And the answer to that would be no. It may make people more happy to harm other folks. Well, because that created greater happiness in the world, it doesn't make it a moral action. Need I say more? We could argue that slavery, according to the utilitarian framework, was a moral thing to do. It created greater happiness and pleasure for the vast majority of the population within the United States. Therefore, the minority, those disenfranchised, i.e. the slaves in this case, should just accept their lot in life and understand that they're participating in a moral system. We all know that slavery was inherently immoral and was a very bad thing. Therefore, the utilitarian framework, while it does offer some guidance on how to make decisions and determine the morality of decisions, we can clearly understand that there's some problems with it. Here's another perspective this cartoon illustrates. I'll read it for you quickly. "Hey," says the bully, "I want that Twinkie." And the victim says, "No, it's mine. I brought it from home. Give me that truck." You just take things from other people because you're bigger. The bully grabs him and picks him up and balls a fist and says, "I'm not taking it. You're giving it to me because it makes both of us happier this way." So we could argue that because there's greater happiness in the world that was created by him taking the truck and the smaller guy, the victim, not being abused, that this was a moral thing to do. As the last slide indicates, how touching, with a very sad face. So clearly, utilitarian framework, while it is important and is probably the most widely used framework out there, it does have some problems and some weaknesses with it. The next thing we're going to talk about is the individual rights perspective. In a nutshell, this perspective argues that everybody is entitled to liberty, the right to life, the right to exist, the right to pursue happiness or to have personal interests, the right to freedom of speech if we were to look at our Constitution. There are certain individual inalienable rights that everybody is given simply because they were born. And no one, under any circumstance, has the right to take away, reduce, or in any other way harm individuals for those rights. Moreover, that access to those rights and the quality of said rights are equal among all people. And this is important because very often we get caught up with, say, the famous or the powerful or the politically well-known, and we believe that somehow they have more rights than those who are not. According to the individual rights perspective, this couldn't be any further from the truth. The president's right to safety or right to life is equal to the right to life of the person who's a bum on the street. No one's right to life, no one's life force is any different from the other. They are equal, and therefore they are deserving of equal treatment, irregardless of statute, personal accomplishment, or financial wealth or power. Here's an example of that. This story is completely fictitious, but let's pretend that it's real. There was a lady who discovered that she had a blood anomaly, and in her blood they discovered that there was a cure to cancer. Cancer takes the lives of literally millions of people across the world, and to be able to have a cure, a universal cure to cancer, would not only be groundbreaking, it would be life-changing for the world. In this lady's body resides a cure to cancer. What do? She has a right to life. We can't simply add up all the right to life of the millions of people that would die and say, oh, looky here. There's more over on this side than there is with her. We got millions versus one. Therefore, we could take her life and get the cure. Now, the right to life theory says life is what it is. And you can't add or sum the quantities up and say this is greater. The more life you add to it, it's simply life. It is the same substance, the same material. And we don't look at the number of people and multiply life by that. Life simply is that. It is life. Whether it's the life of an infant, the life of a 95-year-old person who maybe is going to die in the next 3 days, life is simply that of life, and no one has the right to take it. So in this perspective, would society have the right to take this woman's life and say it's for the greater good? If so, we're getting into utilitarianism, and you got to ask yourself, where do we draw the line? At what point? How many people does it take for society to then say, no, we're not going to do this behavior? 1 person? 20 people? 30 people? How about a whole ethnicity or group of people? Because society says that, hey, it's okay. Let's take out this entire group of people and it's fine. We call that genocide. So individual rights says that no matter what the circumstances are, everybody is entitled to equal protection, to equal rights to life, and the basic fundamental things that make us human. And we call that, at the most fundamental level, human rights. And they're equally distributed across everyone. Another approach to understanding right and wrong decisions is the justice approach. Now, this one is important, and it serves as one of the fundamental backbones for our justice system. Whether justice is doled out correctly or incorrectly, this is the framework upon which we can use to evaluate that. It simply states this: that justice must be equitable, meaning that it's equally distributed among everyone. No one person gets more justice than the other person. That it's fair and impartial, that it treats all people the same. It's impartial. There's no inherent biases in it. And the distribution of costs and benefits to individuals or groups. Now, in order to evaluate this statement to see whether or not it's true, there are 3 components of justice: distributive justice, relational justice, and procedural justice. I'm going to explain each of them here in just a second. Distributive justice refers to the outcome. Whenever the justice decision is made, and what is the outcome? What is the punishment? So to speak, we're saying the punishments and reward. Are they being doled out to the individual people who are involved in this justice episode fairly? I use the illustration of a traffic ticket. If a cop pulls you over and gives you a ticket, you were driving 5 miles over the speed limit, and you decide you're going to go to court and fight the ticket. The judge listens to your plea, listens to the police officer's plea, and then decides that he's going to give you a fine, and this is well within his rights. He's going to give you a fine of $1,000 for the speeding ticket. Would you say that justice was served? Most of us would say no. And the primary reason is not that you weren't breaking the law, because you actually were breaking the law, but the punishment didn't fit the crime. What you received in terms of your punishment from the judge far exceeded the nature and quality of the violation that you received. In that case, we'd say there was a violation of distributive justice. Relational justice refers to the process and procedures that were implemented throughout the justice episode. Sorry, I said that wrong. That's actually procedural justice. Procedural justice refers to the process and procedures that were followed throughout the justice episode, where they all followed correctly, where they all applied to everybody the same. So, same example, where you had the traffic ticket. You were pulled over, you were given a ticket, you weren't told what the ticket was for. You were just given a ticket and you showed up to court to fight it. While you were in court, the police officer was able to say his piece, and the judge denied you of being able to say your piece or defend yourself. At the end of the day, he rules that he's going to dismiss the ticket and the case is dropped. You leave the court, you're happy about the results, but for some reason you still feel a bit disenfranchised. Why do you feel disenfranchised? Because there's a violation of procedural justice. Because not all the processes and procedures were followed correctly or fairly. Right? So, procedural justice is really important. One of the biggest parts of that, please take note of this because this is known to show up on exams before, is the idea of voice. The idea that people, throughout the process, the investigation process, the sharing of the results process, the evaluation process throughout this justice episode, that people are given voice, that they're given the ability to defend themselves. And research shows that when people are given the opportunity to defend themselves, and they can see there's clear procedural justice, all the steps and procedures are laid out, they're fair, and they're being abided by everyone in the situation, that people are more likely to accept the outcome, even if the outcome doesn't work in their favor. But they're more likely to accept the outcome, not challenge it, not engage in additional lawsuits, not appeal the decisions, if procedural justice is followed and they receive voice and were able to defend themselves. The last component of justice is relational justice. Relational justice refers to the way that people are treated. Were people treated with respect and dignity throughout the entire situation? And going back to the traffic example, let's use that in terms of relational justice. You were pulled over for speeding. You acknowledge that you were speeding, but when you're pulled over, the cop talks to you in a very aggressive manner. He calls you all sorts of names, insults you, balls the ticket up, and throws it in your car. Boy, you're offended. You're guilty. You understand that you're guilty, but the way you were treated had so much disrespect that you feel like it was very inappropriate. You then go to court where the police officer is able to defend himself. He continues his pattern of degrading you and insulting you. The judge allows you to defend yourself, and then the judge begins to berate you and talk down to you and insult you. Wow, you feel like everyone is against you. At the end of the day, the judge rules to dismiss the ticket. You walk out grateful for the decision, so you're grateful with the distributive justice, but you still feel a bit uneasy. You feel disenfranchised. Something wasn't quite right. Well, what wasn't right was that there was a violation of relational justice. You weren't treated with respect. The system did not treat you with respect and dignity throughout the justice episode. Now, this could be applied to organizations in and all the time. And it's very important because usually when there's a problem or situation within a company, say HR, and someone's accused of sexual harassment or something like that, and the company does an investigation, if that company can follow the three canons here of justice, the three components of justice, they are less likely to get involved with lawsuits that stem from people believing that they were done inappropriately or unfair. Now let's talk about Kavan's questions and how to solve ethical problems, right? So let's say you're faced with an ethical dilemma at the job, and you're trying to determine what should you do, what's right or what's wrong, how do I behave? He argues that you should ask yourself basically three questions or evaluate yourself according to these three elements. Utility. Does it optimize the satisfaction of the stakeholders? Right? So does your decision, or whatever you're going to decide, maximize the benefit of the stakeholders? And we understand that the stakeholders can be anyone. Now, we said stakeholders, not stockholders. Obviously, stockholders are considered stakeholders, but so are employees. Stakeholders is a much broader concept than stockholders. Stockholders are the owners. Stakeholders are anyone that has a vested interest in that activity. Right? So does it optimize the satisfaction of the stakeholders? 2, does it respect the rights of individuals involved? Is everyone being respected? We're not abusing or causing undue harm to any particular person in the group. And then 3rd, is it consistent with the canons of justice? So go back to the justice theory we're talking about. Is it fair? Is it equitable? Is it treating everyone with respect and dignity? Is the outcome, the distributive justice, is that going to be fair across all people? So you answer these questions, and obviously you're striving to have a positive answer for each component. And if so, then he says, hey, you have your decision that you're making, the action you're taking is inherently ethical. The last framework we're going to talk about here is Kant's categorical imperatives. Now, Kant was a philosopher, and when it comes to understanding right or wrong, we quite frequently reach back to our philosophers to help us think through this. There's one thing that philosophers are really good about doing, and that was creating a framework for us to be able to evaluate ourselves against and make decisions, come to conclusions about our actions and behaviors. Kant has one such framework here. It involves primarily 2 questions that you ask yourself. If you're trying to determine whether or not your action or behavior is moral, is it correct, then ask yourself these 2 questions. Question number 1, would you be okay if everyone else in the world were to do the same thing? Now, I like to twist this a little bit. I like to say, would you be okay if everyone else in the world were willing to do the same thing to you? So let's say you're engaged in a behavior. Let's say you're going to cheat on a test, and you know you'll never be caught. And you're saying, hey, is it moral to do so? Obviously, the easy answer is to say no. But if we're going to use Kant's framework as an example, we'd have to ask our question. Would you be okay with everyone else in the world cheating on you? And if your answer is no, then Kant says you shouldn't do it. It's an immoral behavior. Item number 2, to treat everyone as a means to an end, not just as an end to themselves. I understand that sounds a little bit cryptic. Let's take a closer look at it though. Never treat a person simply as a way to get something accomplished, but treat them with respect and dignity in and of themselves because they are deserving of it themselves. This is what Kant is saying here. Never treat a person simply as a means to an end. For example, let's say I'm a college professor and you're my students. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give everybody an A in the class. And the reason is because I want everybody to be happy. And I want positive reviews at the end of the semester. And sure enough, I give everybody an A and I get positive reviews. They're happy, you're happy, I'm happy, everyone is happy. Is that a moral decision? Is that a moral action according to Kant? Well, here, I'm not treating you with respect and dignity by giving you an A. I'd be treating you with respect and dignity if I actually taught you the material and you learned and you understood and your knowledge reflected the grade of an A. That's treating you with respect and dignity according to education. If I don't do that, then I'm simply treating you as a means to an end. My end was to get grade evaluation so I can get a raise at the end of the year. And I used you to do it. So even if you use a person and they like to be used, it doesn't make your action moral. Okay? So let's take another look at this. There's a great cartoon I'd like to share with you when it comes to Kant. I'll read it for us quickly. The little guy, Calvin, he says, I don't believe in ethics anymore. As far as I'm concerned, the ends justify the means. To get what you can while you're getting's good. That's what I say. Make things right. The winners write the history books anyway. It's a dog-eat-dog world, so I'll just do whatever I have to do and let others argue about whether it's right or not. Then the tiger pushes the young man into a puddle of mud. The young man screams, "Why did you do that?" The tiger answered, "You were in my way. Now you're not. The ends justify the means." The little boy stands up, covered with mud, and says, "I didn't mean for everyone. You don't, just me." The tiger says, "Oh." The basic point here is, as Kant said, is that actions, are inherently ethical if you're willing for everyone in the world to do the same thing. And I add the to you part on there. If you're willing for everybody else to do the same thing to you, then you can conclude that that action is, in fact, moral. Well, that wraps it up for today's lecture. If you have any questions, please be sure to email me or speak to me in class if we're meeting for physical class. And thank you, as always. Don't forget to study, and I'll see you in the next lecture.